welcome to the Revenue Lounge podcast. My name is Bhaswati, and today we are going to talk about data. Not just how to access the right kind of data, but to also drive actionable insights from it to inform strategy. And to educate us on this topic is our guest, Vinny Poliseno. Vinny is the co-founder and VP RevOps Strategy and Architecture at Scale Matters. He is a RevOps leader and a data expert who has helped companies accelerate their revenue growth by making data more actionable and accurate. Hi Vinny, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited to speak with you.
Bhaswati, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here as well.
Yeah, awesome. You can start by telling us a little bit about your current role at Scale Matters. That would be great.
Certainly. So I basically founded Scale Matters with three other folks back in 2019. We went through a little bit of nights and weekends working on this sort of idea. In April of basically 2019, we all sort of came over here full time. We had essentially two of us had all worked together at a previous organization, and we had come up with sort of a process and sort of a way to sort of like tag our data to make it reportable from coming in as a record through the meeting component down to opportunities created down to deal. So we look to sort of monetize that in a sense and sort of help other organizations. So previously, I was running all of our professional services. We did a lot of work where we were basically having folks migrate from one CRM into Salesforce, along with just being their day-to-day tech ops team, right? You know, we're in sort of a world where it's hard to sort of get, as an early stage organization, the investment to make into somebody that sort of be part of your overall RevOps. So we were doing sort of like, fractional team on that scenario. So we were kind of like their day-to-day, running everything and anything you could think of. And part of it was also sort of maintaining their data. So now, I'm sort of focused more on our actual application and Salesforce integration, getting that a bit closer, making sure that there's a lot more sort of configuration, with the hopes by the end of the year to sort of be at a sort of self-service model.
Got it. So you said that you help people migrate their CRM. If you could tell me what are the kind of challenges that you face or companies face when it comes to migrating their CRM in terms of probably data. Yeah.
1000%. So one of the bigger challenges that I think a lot of organizations face when they go to do a CRM migration is they don't actually think about a lot of this sort of work to get there, especially when it comes to the data. So imagine if you're going to move houses and you've been living in this house for 10 years. You've acquired a lot of sort of things that now sort of live in a corner. They live in a box where ultimately it's sort of trash. And you don't want to bring all that sort of trash to your brand new house. You want to sort of purge it. Where we've seen some sort of areas happen is that, you get to the point that we're going to do the migration. We're at the point of saying, all right, what data is going to come through? And everybody just sort of raises their hands and say, just grab everything. We'll worry about it when it gets to Salesforce. And the worst part is now we just brought all this dirty stuff over into Salesforce. We're almost repeating the pattern again. So the more that we're able to sort of like educate our customers while we're sort of doing this, sort of look at the data, try to enrich the data, have it sort of make sense before it comes over, is the ideal state. I mean, obviously it's data, right? You can always go in and sort of clean it or fix it or add it or enrich it. But if you can sort of avoid that, right, it's possible. But, it's a lot of work. And a lot of the time people don't realize that I'm going to move from one CRM to the other and it needs to be done in, 2 weeks time. It's just not really realistic. You need to sort of understand what sort of goes into it. What am I sort of imagining is going to look like at the end of it? And also kind of pay attention throughout the entire process, because we'll come through and we'll sort of demonstrate what we're doing, what do these new processes look like, and everybody just sort of gives you, yeah, it looks good, it gets there until it's go time, and everybody's like, wait, I didn't know this was going to do that, or I didn't realize that automation is going to do this, so on and so forth. So
Yeah, interesting. A little bit of a deja vu there as well, because these are some of the challenges that we've also heard people go through when migrating. Thank you so much for sharing that. So moving on to the next question, another fascinating thing about RevOps leaders we speak to at Nektar is the journey that they undertook to get into the space. So would love to know your journey there too. I'm sure it's a pretty special one. So how did you get into RevOps? What's your story?
I mean, it was completely pure accidental. I was previously running sort of like digital marketing, kind of, website, social media, all that sort of stuff was sort of starting to get pretty popular, that Web 2.0. And the company I was working with at, basically back in 2011, they had the day-to-day Salesforce admin just randomly up and quit, and they had no sort of backup plan. So, I mean, they basically went out to the entire company and said, who knows Salesforce or who wants to learn it? So I just kind of raised my hand, and then, here I am 12 years later, still knee deep in sort of, Salesforce administration, those sort of roles, and sort of the operational side. I just, once I sort of got my hands involved in it, it sort of made a lot more sense, because that's sort of the way that I sort of think and process data, is sort of, if then sort of statements. And that's what a lot of Salesforce kind of is. If this happens, do that, otherwise do this.
Great, I love that. It's interesting because a lot of people say this who have been in RevOps, that it has been something completely unplanned, or it has fallen into their lap out of nowhere, and yours is also an interesting story in that category. Yeah, so my next question is something we again ask all our guests, is how they look at revenue operations. So how would you define this particular function?
Yeah, for sure. So, revenue operations is essentially a group of people who are focused on, generating your leads, creating your opportunities, building your pipeline of your deals, and then maintaining those customers, right? So they're all part of the revenue of that organization. And, I feel like a lot of folks is now, previously somebody who was an ops role is now just RevOps. Where it's a group of people, right? So it's not just like the tools that are being used, it's also the strategy, how it's supposed to happen, how it's supposed to be measured.
Really agree with that there. So, yeah, I think we can move on to the topic of discussion today. We all know the importance of actionable data and the value that it can drive for an organization. So, can you share some examples of this value that can be unlocked through actionable insights from data for our listeners that you have seen in your experience?
1000%. So, I mean, if you're able to sort of get to a full funnel analytics, so if I'm able to sort of see the entire journey of sort of a life cycle of a prospect or customer or whatnot, right? I mean, you need to be able to sort of measure both your leads and contacts basically the same. If you are in the Salesforce world, they are two totally different objects. They don't make sort of a very easy report to treat both of them the same. Where now you're sort of comparing two different reports, exporting to an Excel file or exporting it to a data lake or a BI tool to sort of merge them all together. Now you want to try to figure out, where do those records sort of come from? So what sort of brought them into my system, or what was sort of the last action that we started to follow up on them with? And then kind of starting to, again, isolate yourself down. When did you sort of basically get a meeting on the books? When did those meetings actually get held, right? Because you may have an overzealous SDR that sets a ton of meetings, but none of their prospects ever show up, right? So that's not ideal. You want to basically have a good show rate as well. At least try to aim for about 75%. And then out of those meetings that are held, how many of those are turning into opportunities? Out of those ops, how many of those are turning into deals? And then sort of being able to sort of have like this rep to rep comparison, right? What is one rep that really excels, where they sort of get 90% of their ops through a deal stage, whereas your other folks only get 12%, right? What is that one person doing really well? What can be, recreated, or sort of what's their secret sauce that's making things happen? And then just kind of just understand your sourcing strategies, right? What is that essentially spending in your marketing side? You may be generating a ton of Facebook leads, but maybe those leads coming in, the SDRs can't convert into a meeting being set, or they do a better job of just straight cold calling, right? They have a better list to sort of focus on. So you start to kind of understand your CAC metrics a little bit more, right? You maybe generate a ton of stuff which goes nowhere, which is not ideal. It looks really great on the marketing side, like, hey, we're doing awesome here. But on the sales side, there's no follow through or output. And I mean, that's sort of where this revenue operations comes into play, because it's no longer sales versus marketing. We're both part of the same team. How do we get us through the process?
Yeah, we are all part of the same team. That could be like our mantra going forward.
True.
Yeah, so the data silos, like you were saying, different departments having their own understanding of data, that's a big challenge. So, what are some of these challenges apart from silos that companies face today when it comes to generating actionable insights? Because Companies more often than not possess a lot of data, like large amounts of data, but when it comes to actually knowing what data to focus on and what kind of insights to drive out of it is where the challenge lies. So what are the challenges according to you there?
I mean, bad data hygiene is probably one of the worst ones to sort of happen. So what I was kind of saying earlier, like sort of CRM migrations, taking bad data over and just literally reliving the same cycle of kind of spinning your wheels in the mud. So there should be a couple things in the sense of like kind of keeping an eye on this. So you do roll out a new process because I now want to start to measure these new data points. Okay, great, I put that into place, but I mean, you need to also go in and almost check for the first couple months, if not quarter, if not forever, to sort of make sure that that process is being followed and is collecting properly. Because the worst thing you can do is turn in sort of like a process today, and it sets the date of all today's date on every single record, right? So historically, how can I go back and sort of enrich that with the appropriate date it should have been hit with? The other piece of it is like not knowing what metrics to measure. So, you're going to spend a decent amount of time throwing a lot of spaghetti on the wall. There's going to be metrics that are going to be kind of driven down from like board meetings and or executive leadership or new processes that are going to roll into play because it's tied to commission or whatever the case may be. And you may not have all those sort of metrics there today, which is not the end of the world, right? Because Rome wasn't built in a day. And I mean, you sort of need to reiterate off of what you sort of built upon. But being able to kind of go back and consistently tag in that sort of new data sort of field, and then sort of have it make sense, where like you're kind of looking at stuff where like, is my date sequencing out of line? Looking for these weird data anomalies, kind of having a hygiene check. And then just, making sure that you have just all the same data points to kind of follow yourself through the entire journey, because it's hard to sort of compare data to data if one sample set does not contain the same amount of metrics. It kind of makes comparing, an apple to an orange. Sure, they're both a fruit, but they're completely different things. They're not in the same wheelhouse. Obviously part of it too is like I had said before, right? You continuously invest in sort of something at the top of the funnel is doing really, really well, but just does not get itself all the way down. Or sort of keeping a rep on way longer than they sort of necessarily should be. Because not everybody's meant to be in sales or a sales organization. And part of that is sort of training, right? I'm not saying just viciously go out there. If somebody doesn't hit their goal, just get rid of them. But can you sort of work with them and have them adapt? Otherwise, you can't just kind of keep somebody on forever just because, unfortunately, you're a kind person. You want to sort of see them do well. But if they just kind of can't get with the program or sort of, get to the end result, you got to make kind of a business decision and sort of like let reps go.
Yeah, great insights there, Vinny. Thank you so much for sharing that. And BAT's data hygiene continues to be like a nightmare for RevOps teams, right? So that makes like a perfect segue to the next question, right? So on one hand, we have the challenge of converting our existing data into actionable insights that can drive value. But on the other hand, we have this problem of not having the right data in the first place. So, for example, systems like the CRM are often infested with bad quality. You have duplicate data, you have incorrect data, you have incomplete information, you name it, right? So, how can companies tackle issues such as bad data quality and duplication in their systems? And how do you suggest that they can go about approaching this massive, massive problem?
Anybody I know of that has Salesforce as their CRM, it's always this tongue in cheek, right? Salesforce is our CRM of record. If it's not in Salesforce, it didn't sort of happen. But they all know that sort of their Salesforce data is terrible. Every executive will run their own Excel file. So now your head of sales is managing pipeline from Excel versus the actual opportunities in the system. Your CFO may be running sort of recurring revenue from an Excel file that doesn't replicate exactly what is showing in the Salesforce environment for your actual customers. And your CEO has something completely different that they're using to roll up sort of to the board that maybe massages all their sort of stuff. So, the first thing is sort of getting everybody to make sure that they are making a concerted effort to sort of make the CRM the record of truth. But I mean, look, bad data is going to happen, right? There's no way ifs, ands, or buts around it. I mean, you can put in as many guidelines or guide rails as you actually try to want to put in, but you're going to find them, right? duplicates happen, right? People merge records, they change records, they edit records. When you start putting humans in there and start modifying what like a system may have, you're going to run into weird anomalies. What you got to be able to do though is be able to find those sort of things. So sort of having a data hygiene check that you as a RevOps person checks daily, once a week, once a month, once a quarter. It doesn't necessarily need to be the same exact things you're checking on those cadences, but you should do sort of like a pulse or quality check. For duplicates, there's obviously Salesforce's native duplicate rules. You can buy tools. You can buy, the biggest thing you usually probably find those for is list imports because, somebody doesn't want to expend for like a third party tool because times are tough. They don't have the luxury to spend 20 grand on just a tool to import, but have a process to follow. So that way you're doing it consistently each time. So it's just, you got to get buy-in, right? You got to sort of get everybody on sort of the same page to kind of say that we are going to make a concerted effort, that we are going to be better at data. We are going to basically make our best case here, and sort of empower people, right? So sort of if the executive team wants something, it needs to kind of go down to each of the intermediate managers to sort of help drive the day to day. Because like CEO to SDR, right? They're probably not talking as much as we would hope that they are. But, they may not get the full picture as to why this is sort of important for them to sort of like disposition a meeting, come back and sort of say, did this actually happen? And then obviously just kind of look for data that's already there, right? What can you kind of build upon, because you look at like opportunity stuff. There's just some native things in Salesforce that you can kind of tack onto that Salesforce is naturally tracking for you. Turn on your field history, right? Start tracking history. Unfortunately, it's just from that point forward. You got 10 years of data with all these sort of changes, and you just turn it on today. It's just going to be from this point. And then sort of have a process, right? If you are going to roll out some new sort of process, how do I enrich all my historical data? So like I was kind of saying earlier, not everything shows up with today's date in that date field, right? How can I sort of look backward and try to find when it actually sort of could have crossed that line, or when should I sort of tag that event of happening?
Great points there. I think you've given like a great theory of how we can approach this bad data problem. Maybe, I'd like to ask you how you do things at scale matters. Is there a checklist that you have when it comes to stopping yourself from, falling into the pit of mismanaged data? How does the data governance process looks like for you? Maybe if you can share some insight around that.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't stress it enough. I mean, I certainly think that you should have a data hygiene check, right? Whether you're personally doing it or you have another team member doing it, but it should be looking for data rule breakers, right? This cannot have happened, or this needs to have happened a certain way, and then when you do sort of find these anomalies or these rule breakers, do an investigation, and this could be a very great way to sort of train up a junior member, right? Here's actual data coming in. We were expecting this flow or apex trigger or class or whatever to fire a very particular way, but it's not, right? How do we find that out, right? Why did this happen? Was it an end user did something weird? Was it a new web form that got created that didn't have hidden fields? Is it a process that just from an automation standpoint is not firing the way that we expected it to? So go in, figure out what that potential root cause is, fix that data, put a fix in place, right? But continuously monitor it, right? You got to keep kind of monitoring these things because, I would love to get to a point that sort of says like, this process is running and never ever changes, or it does not need to be reviewed. But when you got so many different humans interacting with the records, you kind of need to kind of keep a pulse check on what's going on.
Yep. And who should own that hygiene check? Like, who should be accountable for it?
Yeah, I mean, it should be a little bit part of that revenue operations group. In my mind, this is probably somebody who's like an analyst is sort of looking at that sort of stuff. So that way that person's sort of saying the data that I'm trying to report off of is actually correct and accurate.
Going back to the point that you covered around data silos, data is just trapped in multiple systems, right? And these systems often don't talk to each other, giving different departments mixed views of what data means or what is the story it tells. So there's just so much confusion because of siloed data. So from a RevOps perspective, what role can like a RevOps team play in breaking this kind of data silos that exists in companies and bring together the entire organization under a common understanding of data?
Yeah, awesome question. And I mean, a lot of the day to day, when people think RevOps, they think it's like one individual person. But in reality, it should be like sort of four different key sort of contributors in this scenario. You kind of have your management person who's like your strategic thinker, the person who's sort of corralling or kind of working with each of the division heads to kind of get them, what their business objectives are, what sort of data that they need, and what kind of frequency that they sort of need to see that sort of stuff. Folks that are sort of dealing with your, board. You sort of have an enablement person where they're essentially training your end user. They're basically the super user of the system that you built. I mean, you put together a car, you're expecting the car to drive 55 straight, but you have users that come in and they make a left-hand turn at 80 miles an hour or a right-hand turn or do a U-turn, right? So sort of showing them the guide rails and also coming back with their feedback, right? So not only necessarily what did we build for you, but did I just make this harder? Did this previously used to take you 5 minutes, now I've just added 10 more minutes because you got to fill in 5 other validation rules to sort of close out a record. Then you sort of have your insight folks, right? These are your analysts. These are the folks that are sort of looking at the data. They're making sure that the data doesn't have rule breakers. They're there trying to make decisions on data. They're there trying to make sort of predictability or like data models, right? Sort of things that say, if we hire more heads, do we get to more opportunities? If we invest in these sort of ads, do we get more opportunities or deals? And then you got your tool tech folks, right? So you need to have your day-to-day administrators that can tie all this data back and forth to one another. You got your marketing automation system. What key fields are coming back and forth? What's driven from marketing automation versus CRM? Your sales enrichment tool, right? How do I update sort of things? Like if I'm a sales rep, I just logged a call and said the person told me to go screw myself and never call me again. I should be able to make a disposition and sort of kill that record so I don't call them again in a week. So sort of tying those things together. So, I do realize that, realistically going out and sort of having these 4 individual key contributors is not very likely or very high, so you may be looking at somebody who is wearing multiple hats, but they need to sort of be able to like specialize in these sort of different areas to be able to like put that hat on and say, okay, I'm going to do training today, or I'm going to do data insights today. Because, the reality is I just feel like RevOps now is essentially what sales ops was. And everybody just kind of says they're just going to solve it, bring it over to RevOps. And that's just not realistically fair and what a company should be sort of doing.
Great points there. And if we do talk about data, we have to talk about technology, right? You did touch upon it a little bit, but the tech stack and the processes that we set around it will play a huge role in making data work better for companies. So what are the tech stack challenges today that prevent data from being actionable that you've seen or witnessed around you?
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly one of these areas that you just never really connect the application properly. You don't have your sync rules set up appropriately. One system's controlling it where you expect the other one to. They're bi-directional. You have like a nightly sync that runs from a whole nother system that overrides stuff every single night. I've kind of seen time and time again too, like you'll buy a third-party tool and they sort of get you through like the minimum viable connection, right? Data's connected, it's pushing back and forward, cool, our implementation's done, adios. But they don't show you the other 85% of the things you can do with this sort of connection. And kind of like as a junior admin or a tech tool person, you may not know that. And that's sort of why you do want to have somebody with this insights or management sort of strategic thinking to understand how else do I need to take these other third-party things and sort of, show them in my CRM or be able to show them from like a visual thing or report off of them or bring them into my data warehouse and be able to make actionable decisions off of them.
So in a market like now, where there are budget cuts across the board, and revenue leaders are being asked to drive efficiency, so technology will definitely be an ally in achieving this effective and efficient growth, right? But it's easier said than done. I mean, choosing the right tools for the tech stack is often way more complicated, be it, deriving ROI from it, driving adoption, or the tool actually adding value to revenue teams, right? So for somebody who's probably struggling with this right now and looking to procure some tools under a severely limited budget, so what would be your advice when it comes to selecting these tools for their tech stack and implementing them in a way that puts them at a step closer to generating better insights from the data that they have.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is trying to really understand what you have today, right? Because I've seen time and time again where folks will buy similar tools where they each have sort of a niche thing that they solve, but one of them kind of does both of them, just doesn't to the same extent, right? So try to get rid of duplicate tools that do sort of the same thing. Um, Understand what data points you're trying to really capture, right? Because there's sort of that build versus buy mentality, especially where we are now, right? What can I sort of build internally that's very unique to me versus what can I buy? Building is not always the best thing either because you may create it so unique that it's so unique to your individual organization that if you make a process change or a business solution change, the entire thing that you just did may need to be recreated. But think about like what you want to sort of need today, tomorrow, 1 year from now, 5 years from now, because you're not going to get it right. I mean, you're going to buy technology today that's going to be acquired by somebody else, displays, sunset, or something brand new is going to come out in a year that's going to be even better and cheaper and faster. So what I would try to recommend is sort of think about what is it I'm trying to solve, and then avoid trying to string too many tools together all at the same time. Because I've seen sort of time and time again, I'm going to do a CRM migration plus a sales acceleration tool plus a marketing automation system all in the same quarter. God bless you for making that attempt, but I think you're just setting yourself up for a disaster because ideally what you want to sort of do is stay highly focused on the one tool that you are basically installing. And I'd say give yourself about a quarter worth of time to do this. You want to kind of have about 6 weeks to do the implementation. Some of them obviously this can be sped up, right? Depending on if it's plug and play or whatever the case may be. But some of these other strategic tools may take a bit longer to kind of get going. You want to have about 2 weeks to sort of train your users. And then you sort of have a month then to sort of look for any sort of these data anomalies or tweaks that you want to continuously make now over that quarter of a period. So once you sort of get yourself in a reliable, consistent data tagging standpoint, I think you're then at the point to sort of now we can look at the next tool and sort of reiterate and rerun through that whole system again.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So, that actually brings us to the end of the first section of this podcast, and we can move on to the next section, which is like a hot favorite the rapid fire section. So, we ask these fun questions with an intent of getting to know you better. So, let's begin with that. Are you ready?
Let's rock and roll.
So, the first question is, what's one book that you have loved in the recent past that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not a huge book reader, so I don't have a great answer for this one. But what I would say is sort of keep up on sort of blogs that are out there. My favorites that I have: Automation Champion, Salesforce Ben, Salesforce Flowsum, just to name a couple of them.
Yeah, definitely. Those are our favorites as well. Thanks for those recommendations. We are also constantly on the lookout for great blogs. Okay, moving on to the next question. What's your favorite part about working in ops?
I mean, literally every day is going to be a new challenge. There is no day in my mind that's ever replicable. They always are very different, and there's a new, need or urgency.
Great. So, talking about good things, we also come to the controversial part of it. What's your least favorite part about working in ops?
I mean, it's going to be that same exact answer, right? It's every day sort of brings in a new challenge. You may have had out in your calendar, you're going to do a complete implementation of something today, but you just realize when your colleagues just disabled a flow that's no longer adding data, or they just imported a list of 20,000 records that are all bad dates. So it's kind of distractions, reactive versus proactive.
Fair enough. So, who's one RevOps leader, can be more than one, but who you personally look up to and why?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough question because there's so many awesome people out in this sort of community. Just to kind of rattle off a handful of them, I mean, you got Justin Gavette, Ben Fuller, Eric Lopez, Sarah Bush, Brad Smith, James MacArthur, Jackie Leahy, Max Cohen. I mean, just to name a handful of folks that I'll follow on LinkedIn or just in these sort of Slack communities that are out there.
Yeah, we love them all there, and I know like it's a tough question to choose one. So moving on, this is something that I really love listening to because we get such amazing responses. So, is there an advice that you received from someone that has stayed with you and you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, I mean, always work out of a sandbox. Always do all your testing there. You can never really hurt anything that you can't just retroactively roll back. And then if you are going to be working out of a sandbox and you want to refresh it, just check with others before you do it, because the worst thing you can do is click the refresh button when somebody is knee deep into developing something new and they have not backed it up. You can ask for forgiveness to sort of do a rollback from Salesforce, but just always ask if you got a collective of people working in the same environment.
I'd love that advice. Last one for you. One piece of advice for people who'd like to have your job someday in RevOps.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of valuable information that's across the internet. I mean, a lot of my Salesforce stuff has been very self-taught from Trailhead, YouTube, reading blogs. I mean, you got this emergence of these Slack communities. That there's a ton of them out there. I mean, the one that I'm probably closest to is Wizards of Ops. But I mean, with the overall, just the internet itself and being a lot of people that are jerks or trolls to one another, it just seems like in the revenue operations world, everybody is willing to bend over backwards to help you because we've all been in that sort of same shoes, and take advantage of that. I mean, by all means, if I have the time and if somebody asks me to sort of help them or understand something, I'm more than happy to always get on a call or schedule time or look at it via screen share, along with all those people I mentioned earlier. All happy to sort of help you troubleshoot uh, how to get your best outcome.
No, I totally second you on that. Being in the communities, I think everybody would agree when I say that there's something really special about this community. They are always looking out for one another and always helping each other out. So totally second you on that. So yeah, thank you so much, Vinny. It was so great chatting with you. Thank you for sharing everything so candidly, and I'm sure this will be very beneficial for our listeners.
Yeah, this is awesome. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time chatting with you today.
Likewise, thank you so much. You have a great day ahead of you.
Do the same. Bye.